I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. Good evening. I welcome my professionals, John Fund of the National Review Online, just returned from Europe, David Drucker of the Washington Examiner in Washington, Thaddeus McCotter, recovering politician, but nonetheless a political voice in Detroit at WJR, the great voice of the Great Lakes. Gentlemen, I present the Pew Research Center for the People and the Press, publishing within these last hours its findings on the public and Bergdahl prisoner exchange for 5 Taliban commanders. The results are surprising, not in that they're partisan, but that they're clear-cut. For example, in the question, Bergdahl exchange is the right thing or the wrong thing to do, the overwhelming decision is Republicans 71 wrong, 16 right, Independents 44 wrong, 32 right, Democrats 24 wrong, 55 right, for a summary total of 43 wrong thing, 34 right thing. Okay, a mixed opinion, but decidedly on the side of it was the wrong thing to do. And I go down to the one that I think is most telling of this Pew poll, and I think we can all agree that the Pew poll is not associated with either political party or a political outcome. Should the president be required to inform Congress on decisions like this? The overwhelming decision from the American people is 64% yes, 30% no. Strikingly, when you break it down in terms of partisan, independents are more than 2-to-1 yes, inform Congress. Republicans 8-to-1 yes, inform Congress. And the Democrats, again, protecting a president they voted for twice, 44% yes, 53% no. Mr. Drucker, I begin with you because this is now a political matter in Washington. The Bergdahl Taliban firestorm. Congress is now holding hearings. Mr. Hagel will go up and explain his policies. It's not enough to say, did the administration miscalculate? It's the question now is, can they recover? Are they recovering? Good evening to you, David.
Good evening, John. And I think over time they can recover. I mean, just about anything is recoverable, but they haven't recovered yet, and I think they're a long way from doing so. And depending on how they handle this and you know, what we learn about Mr. Bergdahl and what we learn about, you know, possible missions to try and recover him and the circumstances surrounding his decision to walk off of that forward operating base, you know, that's going to determine sort of how deep this goes. It's a very difficult situation. I would just say that this is not the first time the administration has been faced with situations like this, and in some cases they've found a way to overcome them, even if it's just by waiting them out.
Mr. Fund, your observation, arriving back from Europe, you must think, what happened to my America? But we're all caught up in this conversation. Do you trade 5 senior cutthroats who led the Afghanistan depredations of a decade ago? Do you trade them for an enlisted man? And right now we're all caught up in process. So when you arrived back on planet Earth, John, were you amazed by this, or did you just take it in stride? This is the way it goes in the second Obama term.
Well, I was in Normandy, France, with the survivors or the veterans who had been waiting ashore in D-Day 70 years ago. They're now in their late 80s or early 90s. So I sampled a lot of opinion of people from our greatest generation. And the 2 things that they said over and over again were, one, you do not release enemies of America that you know will be back on the playing field at most in a year. And in fact, we already have one senior Taliban commander we released in exchange for Bergdahl saying, of course I'm going to return to the fight. And secondly, even though there's strong support for Commander-in-Chief, when the veterans discovered there was a law requiring the president to consult with Congress 30 days before doing such a thing, and that he had brazenly broken it, not even pretending to honor the spirit of the law, they just said, this goes too far. You know, we are not a government of men, we are a government of laws, and this traduces that.
Again, on the Pew poll, gentlemen, to show that we're not talking about something that's not pressing the American people. right now, the question of, are you following this story very closely? And these 5 stories were mentioned. The top of the pile is veterans hospitals, the VA scandal, which was just 10 days ago. And it's still continuing. More revelations all the time. Whistleblowers having been abused or intimidated in some fashion. And I follow the Wichita, Kansas VA hospital named for Bob Dole. And it started at 9 on a waiting list. It went to 80 on a waiting list. Now it's well over 1,000 on waiting lists. So that story is being followed. That by 34% of the respondents, but tied with that is the Bergdahl exchange for Taliban prisoners. In other words, those 2 stories are now leading. Look what's third. The U.S. economy has fallen to third. Fourth is the EPA plan to limit carbon emissions. And fifth is, who cares who wins the congressional election, down at 14%. David, is there a fever in Congress over the Bergdahl thing, or is the VA hospital still dominant, or are people's heads spinning around?
Well, I think we're going to find out this week. You know, that the House of Representatives was on recess last week, and I mean, it's clearly occupied the Senate, and they're both in this week, and so I think we'll figure more of that out. I think a lot of what you're seeing is the news coverage. The news coverage always goes with the thing that's new, especially if it's a big story. It pushes other things back, and that's sort of how people react to it. We're going to keep getting revelations about the VA. So I think that'll stick around. But this Bergdahl story hits on so many fronts: national security, the war on terror, 9/11, the Taliban, the congressional versus the executive branches of government, and just, you know, it even gets into some of the partisan warfare between the president and Republicans in Congress. And then on top of it, it's started to pit Democrats against their own president. Subtly, but it's very noticeable here. It's something that we've really picked up on with this situation. So I think that's a lot of what makes this thing such a hot and heavy story, and that's one that's going to stick around for a while.
Mr. Fund, again on the Pew poll, and I recommend the Pew poll to everyone because there are non-intuitive things here. Bergdahl's story continues to unfold. The question was, do you view this story with anger or sympathy? The dominant response, all response is neither. Americans are neither angry or sympathetic with the Bergdahl story. I guess we could conclude, John, that they're puzzled. They're absolutely flummoxed. What's going on? Mr. Fund, are you with me?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. What's going on is, of course, complete and utter confusion in Congress. Remember, Democrats in Congress have loyally followed this president for 5 years. Now, what senior Democrats are telling me and what their staff is telling me is, at best, this administration is accident-prone. And that means one of them compared it to a caravan going to a wedding. And you're all in convoy, you're all supposed to follow each other. But the lead car is weaving in and out of traffic as if the driver is drunk. Do you want to follow that car? That car has been drunk before. There's a proven record of intoxication. And that's why you're seeing this deafening silence among Democrats in Congress, John. They don't trust the political instincts of this administration because this error is so colossal. And it came in part because they refused to consult with Congress, which would have told them differently.
Thaddeus, you went through the second Bush administration, the 2006 election, when the Democrats overwhelmed you in the wave election and Nancy Pelosi became Speaker. At that time, did you have a sense that the Bush White House had gone deaf, had stopped listening to Congress, had stopped listening to the American people?
No, but you had a sense that the president especially, and I would argue rightly so in a time of war, was very focused on our troops and on the strategic operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that other issues certainly were subordinated to that, if not at times almost completely abandoned and overlooked.
Mr. Fund, help me. Wasn't that the Harriet Miers flap in 2006, right before the election? I can't remember when that happened.
That happened in 2006. Early part of 2006, and it was an early warning signal that that the Bush administration had lost its political antenna.
Yeah, that's the issue here. We're professionals commenting on politics, and the White House has to be sensitive, has to listen. And what listening posts do they have? They have Congress. When we come back, There's much more to say about Bergdahl and Taliban. We'll leave it until the investigations and the hearings and Secretary of Defense Hagel goes before the House and the Senate this week to comment on Bergdahl and Hagel, because when we come back, there is news everywhere else, and especially I'm going to speak to Mr. Drucker. He has a piece up today in Washington Examiner about an alternative Speaker of the House to John Boehner in the new term. I'm John Batchelor with Thaddeus McCotter, John Fund, and David Drucker.